Hello friends, and welcome to yet another session of Nitco Talks. Today we have fantastic personalities from God's own country, from Kerala, and they are with us in the same room. We are happy to have all of them, and I would like to do an introduction, a special introduction of each and every one of them. Mr. Jaigopal Rao is a pioneer in sustainable development across India. He is passionately influenced by his interaction with the renowned architect Laurie Baker and his life journey of humanizing work with the core expertise of design build makes him a true master in his field. Professor K.T. Ravindran, welcome sir, is a true example of the topic today, the larger purpose of architecture. He has had a real influence on many new budding architects, and he is a pioneer in his role across multiple organizations as a dean, a founder, and a president. He is a leading voice of urban design who seeks to build a new world. Welcome, sir. For over 3 decades, Padma Shri recipient Gopal Shankar has been at the forefront of sustainable architecture in not just India, but around the world. A man who understood India, building homes and with meager resources. Whether they are vegetable vendors or traditional fishermen, he is an architect for the masses. In his own words, it was through architecture that I could reach out to millions of people and hold hands with them. Thank you, sir. Welcome. And finally, to get some out-of-the-box thinking, we have none other than Mr. Bose Krishnamachari, an internationally acclaimed artist, curator. He is the founder, member, and president of the Kochi Biennale Foundation and has a multifaceted contribution to contemporary art of paintings, sculpture, photography, and architecture. I have a painting of his right behind me, which is actually lying in a different room, but I moved it here only for this session. I'm delighted to have the 4 eminent personalities with us. If I were to ask all our eminent panelists what they feel is the larger purpose of architecture and design, and one fundamental thing which is going wrong, what would that be? Can we take it with Mr. Ravindran?
Well, I would say that one can see a larger purpose. It's not lying just in one direction. It lies in many layers, in the layers of the environment, in the layers of the larger purpose of transforming society, transforming the lives of people, and just the sheer pleasure of creating something that's beautiful. So there's an aesthetic, there is a social, as well as there's a climatic purpose in architecture. So at all these planes, they have 2 kinds of existence. One is at the visible material level, and the other is the invisible and intangible level. Now, the intangible one is an experiential one, and it's largely vested not in the material side of architecture, but in its speciality. That's how space, in fact, becomes the transformative agent of change in society. Not very much just the materiality of the walls and the appearance and the elevation and the colors and the textures and so on. Of course, they all are also equally significant because there's a tactile quality to architecture, and that has an impact on the psyche as well. But it's the transformative quality really lies in space. And I think it's in the articulation of space that the larger purpose of social transformation lies. As far as material is concerned, it's certainly vested in the way we choose materials, what is the kind of ecological baggage that each material carries, and how does it impact in its new location. All those things are become very important.
Well, we'll ask Mr. Shankar to give his point of view on this topic, and the others can mute. Thank you.
When I joined architecture, we were taught that architecture was all about conditioning of spaces for human comfort. But when I actually started my journey as an architect, I started learning about the built environment. Then I realized that architect's job is to condition that kind of space. And it was not only about human comfort. Architecture, I thought, was about holding hands. To me, the purpose and the larger purpose of architecture is to actually reach out and hold hands. For a minute, let me talk about the needs instead of comforts. Because if you really look at the social context in India, we are talking about millions of people without adequate housing. To me, if you want to get into the meaningful expressions of architecture, unless and until you touch their lives, I think your architecture will be done. And so, how do you lend meaning to your journey? Your perceptions about architecture, your attitude to architecture is something that actually defines you. That way, let me also tell you this. I mean, with the expanse, the space around you is so expansive. You cull out or you scoop out a little bit of space and make a kind of environment for human beings to survive. Not only human beings, make it an enjoyable kind of an existence. But having said that, let me also continue a little bit. I was just looking at the regional context. Today, I'll be actually talking only about regional context and regional perspectives. What architecture meant to me in a very regional context, I mean Kerala's context, just looking at the legacy of what architecture meant to me, Architecture meant values. Architecture meant a value system to me. You see, when I look at the old expressions of architecture, I see a lot of truthfulness in it. I see a lot of honesty in that. It is all about honesty and truthfulness when you talk about materials, technologies, and the rest of it. That is something that probably made the legacy really worthy of looking at today.
What is the larger purpose of architecture and design? And what is one fundamental thing which is going wrong?
Yeah, Katie and Shankar have given a broad, introduction in a good direction. So I'll start off with what is going wrong, perhaps. Yeah. So I'll say in the context of our virus that we have, the COVID virus that is there, in architecture and in planning too, we have a virus which we have not actually discovered or we are not aware of. And that virus is actually what is called urban sprawl. So we see urban and then the present, lifestyle entirely based a lot on automobile and urban sprawl. So we have more and more roads. We have highways, we have state highways, national highways, we have coastal highways, we have hill highways, we have all kinds of state highways and then rural roads. All these roads are cutting across into our forests, into our wetlands, into our paddy fields, all these areas get destroyed, and more automobiles cause so much of accidents, and this urban sprawl destroying our whole fabric of our social society is something that that virus is not something that we are not understanding. And in a way, the present COVID virus made us aware that a lot of these problems and the subsequent problems of pollution, all kinds of pollution, and you find that when rural areas are getting, more and more buildings are coming, and with all kinds of FSI of 4 in all rural areas, you find it very difficult to service it. You'll need more water supply lines, you need more electricity lines. Then roads will also mean more flyovers, more bridges. Then, safety problems, there is no street lights, people, and so much of, money goes into construction of these roads, and then you destroy a lot of hills, and landslides are caused. All these are problems of urban sprawl, and somewhere we have to get a grip on this urban sprawl and get a control. And then once that is in control, only our architecture will improve accordingly. Otherwise, we are spending so much of money on this. We are not reaching anywhere, and we are wasting so much of our resources. So this urban sprawl and so much of resources going waste in our country, trying to emulate certain lifestyles, is something that it definitely has a way out, and definitely it needs to be addressed fairly soon and immediately, and it can be addressed also, but we'll talk about that subsequently after Bose also comes up with his point of view.
Yes, can we hear Mr. Krishnamachari? You have to unmute yourself and talk. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Thank you for inviting me as part of this. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah. I would say that, everybody said this, almost the same, maybe parallel thinking I have it. Along with them, I would like to say something like this. It doesn't come down to the common man. When we talk about architecture, I think it is architecture, that word itself, I think it is almost sounds like a luxury. For me, architecture is architecture and design is not at all in their, like common man's platter. Even if the platter was utilitarian design, a good architecture should aim for healthy atmosphere with an organic environment and responsible affability. We should be able to think of architecture as democracy. That's what I believe. Unfortunately, it is true that the mushrooming of urban landscapes have encroached upon the rural greenscapes in Kerala. There is an obsession for the traditional, which is brilliant, but at the same time, it is monotonously, I would say, replicated. It is mostly horizontal architecture happening. Expansion covering the earth itself is actually a dangerous thing. There is a kind of suffocation created by the horizontal buildings. I think we have to, I would like to think when we look at Kerala, the water bodies are one of the most important elements. And also we have to think about architecture vertically. Thank you.
Yeah, architecture, especially in Kerala, has a larger historical, climatic, and cultural context, a state with a larger connect to craftsmen, nature, natural materials, and also a distinct style. It is also getting engulfed into the global urban jungle. How do you as an architect blend with both the worlds? We can take it with Mr. Rao.
Yeah. So if I'm to continue from my critique on the urban sprawl, you together with the urban sprawl, now the COVID conditions are bringing in unemployment. All kinds of people are coming from, people who are outside of Kerala, they're coming back. Outside of India, outside in other states are coming back to Kerala. So all this is causing a lot of people who are migrating back. In the rest of the country also, there is all kinds of migration that is happening, where people from Delhi are migrating out. A lot of people are coming back to Delhi. All these are causing so much of flux around the country. Whereas if there is this is where a decentralization of our resources become very important, and decentralized planning. And in a way, that is where I was recently had circulated a paper on what I suggested as a 73-74 degree turn in our whole development is what I coined it. It primarily says that 73rd and 74th Amendment in our Constitution actually speaks about decentralization. It speaks about local bodies having a lot of powers, and local bodies including urban local bodies. Then you have gram panchayats. All these asserting their powers, and once those bodies actually they have been vested with a lot of powers in the 73rd and 74th Amendment. And once these bodies assert back their powers, then we can actually get a lot of things that the common people actually wants. People, you can prevent a lot of the migration across cities. You can give proper housing for people in the rural areas. Agriculture can be improved. The rural areas will come back into vibrancy. A lot of such kind of changes can happen if there is a real powers are given to the 73rd and 74th Amendment that our Constitution envisages. And that is something that I would say that we all look forward to. Then we can improve a lot of small towns, small cities. All these can really come up as a very planned, settlements, and it can actually absorb a lot of the migrants back into their old hometowns, and these can improve. They can be self-sufficient in water. They can be self-sufficient in food. They can be self-sufficient in electricity. They can be self-sufficient in the waste management. All these are possible if there is a better planning, and that would definitely result in a better environment around, and subsequently it will cause a positive vibration as far as architecture in those areas are concerned. And once that happens, there will be a transformation. And as Bose was saying, there has to be a good mix of vertical as well as horizontal development that way. But it has to be whatever, it should not sprawl out. It should be whatever the human settlements should all get densified into smaller pockets, so that hinterlands are opened out for forests, hinterlands are opened out for agriculture, hinterland is opened out for waterways, hinterland is opened out for wetlands. All these are preserved. Our natural heritage is preserved. Our existing built heritage is preserved. All these can coexist if there is a better sensitivity and better understanding of our planning our planning needs. I stop with it.
Wonderful. Let's hear Professor Ravindran. In the meantime, if the rest of us can be on mute, please.
Well, I'll take off from where Mr. Rao has just finished. That's about going back to the people in terms of finding a proper language for development, I cannot agree more with what he said. But I'd also like to add one more thing, especially to the last point that he raised about vertical growth and so on. When we say vertical, the imagination of the people who control capital is always in going towards a high-rise building, which I don't agree with that form of development. I don't agree with a high-rise development, particularly for a place like Kerala. If you look at the last point which Mr. Rao had raised about, kind of having the hinterlands, carrying all the agriculture and wetlands and so on, I'd like to argue that in the traditional Kerala settlement, taking the cue from the question that you had originally posed, in the traditional settlement, there was an absolute mixture and a fully integrated development form where the wetlands and the paddy fields and the houses and the gardens and the forests, everything was very well integrated. It was a unified settlement. Yeah, that's why you have in Kerala traditionally the typology of the building in the garden, rather than having kind of open spaces, manicured open spaces within landscaped architectural systems. So there is already fundamental lessons in the new kind of thinking in terms of urbanization, which is in fact thinking about bringing in urban agriculture into settlements, and thinking about bringing water bodies and not building on wetland systems and so on, integrating the water systems, integrating the landscape, integrating the crops into the living environment. That is the kind of direction in which the future is going to move. It's not going to move into dense multi-story buildings and then surrounded by a hinterland which is full of agriculture and green and water. That's the thinking that has been grown out of the Industrial Revolution in the turn of the century. And we are continuing to suffer from that format of thinking. And that's where I think the new direction for Kerala particularly already lies in the fact that it had an integrated development. And even now, if you see, there is no basic distinction between a town and the country in Kerala. It's a contiguous urban system. And of course, there are areas where there are predominantly more water and fields, and predominantly there are areas which are concentrated cities. We had cities since going back to 2000 years. We had settlements which are mercantile settlements at the estuaries of rivers, which were dense settlements where you had street formations and purely urban functions. But that was always complemented by a lush green forests and paddy fields where all the resources to grow those cities actually came from. So there has always been that integration between the natural resources and human settlements in Kerala. And if one is able to carry that forward, I think the lessons for future lies in the way we analyze and understand the past of Kerala's development.
Mr. Krishnamachari, if the others could mute, please. You'll have to unmute, yes, thank you.
Yeah, I do agree on, when we talk about horizontal as well as, vertical architecture. I totally agree, but I was just looking at the studies. When we look at the density of people living in Kerala, it is 3 times more than any other state in India. And when even you take the New York State in the US is 4 times larger than Kerala state, and which they have 41,300 square kilometers area which they are covered. And when we look at the density of people are little above than half, 1.95 crore people are living in that density in the US states of New York. Kerala is 3.48 crores of people are living. I do agree there are people also, there are 4 million people are outside Kerala living, and that's kind of, there are lots of issues, but I think it is important to consider thinking about the landscapes and the encroachment of the urban landscape to the greenscapes of rural areas, which everybody's agreed on. But I believe juxtapositions of contemporary materiality with traditional craftsmanship will help in articulating a new architectural philosophy in Kerala. I believe that juxtapositions of contemporary materiality with traditional craftsmanship, I repeat, will help in articulating a postmodern architectural philosophy. Of course, when you use postmodern, that word itself is a kind of, you can go on talking about a lot. As I do believe history is an nostalgia assembled with the materiality, I would give more visual plethora, complex aesthetic at sight in Kerala. When I look at the architectural spaces, I believe that traditional architecture is monotonously replicated, as I said earlier. Of course, I believe that air circulations, when we look at the architecture being built in Kerala, is with the sense of understanding ecology and things like that. But I think in contemporary time, I don't know how we'll be taking it further. We have to think quite a lot about this contemporary architecture when we are looking for future.
Mr. Shankar, what is your impression?
I have a completely different take on the issue because I believe that we are being very heavily conditioned by the rhetorics, the global urban jungle is a very negative expression to me. You see, we should all understand that urbanization cannot be wished away. The pace and intensity of urbanization cannot be wished away. It's a reality. The challenge before is to look at the positives. There are many negatives, but let us look at the positives and internalize the elements and work our way forward. That is not the question all about. The question is about blending of the natural resources that we have, the legacy that we have, and imbibing the spirit and going forward. But when you say the word blending, it actually reminds me of the writer Gautam Bhatia, who wrote about, it's a funny book, a bit really humorous. He wrote about, blending, seemingly diverse architecture styles. I mean, Tamil and Tiffany styles of architecture getting blended together, Punjabi Baroque architecture getting blended. That's a bad blend. I don't want to get into that conversation. Instead, let me go back to my old premises. I would like to look at architecture in different perspective, like looking at local capabilities, looking at, the architecture is always evolving. It has to have a context, it has to have a period. The time element is very crucial. To me, the present day architecture needs a very local perspective on this. And that's what, unfortunately, our fraternity doesn't have. We have a very local perspective, local sensibilities, local capabilities, look at local vocabulary of materials and technologies, look at our own strengths, imbibing the spirit of probably traditional architecture, imbibing the spirit, but putting it into a new frame. What is the new frame? What is the new urban frame? New urban frame talks about, as Ravindran sir rightly put it, the climate change, sustainability, and the rest of it. And one of the things that we should really learn, me from Kerala, let me tell you that our buildings were all climate friendly. Our buildings were all people friendly. Our building always had a value system to bang on. So to me, that is the thing. That is the way out. Looking at local design solutions, developing that paradigm, gaining strength from that domain, and going forward level-headed. Thank you.
But Shankar, what is going wrong right now? Because as you know, the Kerala has seen a lot of natural disasters, and they're coming in repeatedly. What is it you think that is causing this, and what is going wrong with what we are doing there?
Well, let me tell you this. I mean, I've been working in the disaster mitigation management sector for the last 3 decades across the world. I've been heading missions, international missions in disaster mitigation areas. But Kerala has not really learned. I mean, we have not been exposed to real disasters. You know, our first exposure was in 2004, when a very minuscule, minor part of Kerala got affected by tsunami waves. In 2018, that was when we had a real, flavor of what a disaster can be. We didn't learn anything. 2018 floods came. We talked about it, rhetorics came, we were conditioned by heavy rhetorics, but nothing really happened on the ground level. We were talking about revising the building bylaws, we were talking about revised land usage guidelines, nothing actually happened on the ground level. 2019, 1 year after, floods came back again. And we are being so complacent. That is what really surprises me from the state. We are being very complacent, and a few weeks from now, we are going to be again hit by another calamity. I'm very sure about the meteorology people are talking about another flood in Kerala, probably in July, August time again, another few weeks, and we are going to face the calamity. Kerala, I mean, one should learn from disaster, actually gives a lot of opportunity to learn. And we have to learn from the local lessons, you know. What has happened in Kerala? One reason, let me point out that one reason. What has happened in Kerala is we have manipulated the natural land profile. We have manipulated. Kerala is rich in mountains. We have very rich, midlands. We have a very long coastal line. And our architecture always used to hack the terrains. Let me tell you that with such pride and pleasure, let me tell you that our style of organic architecture touched that. You know, our buildings belong to the mountain, our buildings really belong to the midlands, and our buildings belong to the, but that has been very badly mutilated, violated. Everything is being leveled out, mountains are being taken away, the midlands are being, manipulated, the profile is being, and the contours are being manipulated, we are cutting down trees, we are altering the course of rivers, and nature will find its way. Nature is a big equalizer, it's a big leveler. And we, as a fraternity, architects and engineers are primarily responsible for this. Let me tell you that. Why should we look at the opening of dams and such silly reasons for this? But we are responsible because we have done this damage. You know, architects and engineers being solely responsible for the, I should put the blame on our fraternity, We are solely responsible because we are, our manipulative practices, architecture, our manipulative interventions, as far as land management is concerned, soil management is concerned, habitat management is concerned, actually is wreaking havoc. Kerala should come out with mandatory protocols. Kerala should come out with anticipated, we should say no. There can be 2 years. So you have to say no. You have to say no. Kerala, we call ourselves a God's own country. And if this kind of violations, manipulations, dilutions are going on, then it's havoc time for Kerala again. Yeah.
Let's ask the professor, what does he feel? What's going wrong? What do we do? What do we do going forward?
Well, I think we need to view the calamities caused and the amount of deaths and loss of property that happened during the floods from a kind of a long-term perspective. Now, if you look at what has happened to the development in Kerala is that as new money has come into Kerala from Gulf returnees and so on, not only from Gulf returnees, also local Keralites and people like us who live around, not necessarily in Kerala, but outside, but are, however, contributing to wealth generation in the state, have actually resulted in a huge demand for new housing. And this housing was not properly directed because what happened was over a long period of time, through a process of accretion, these new settlements have grown on riverfronts, riverbeds, in paddy fields, in areas which are low-lying and swampy areas which should have been preserved, and also in what is called wasteland. There is nothing called wasteland in nature. Every part of the land is of some use to the total ecosystem. And instead of viewing it from that perspective, the idea of waste is a view from the perspective of consumption. So if that which cannot be consumed is a waste, that's the perspective. So that is the mindset that requires a change. And this would mean very serious rethinking on the way we actually use land. It would mean very drastic, perhaps politically very sensitive and socially very sensitive solutions, like rehabilitation of the people who live in low-lying and riverbed, low-lying areas and riverbed and paddy fields back into a new typology of settlement, where instead of talking about high-rise, we talk about high-density, low-rise development, in which we concentrate more people in lesser parcels of land, but without going high and causing all the damages that comes along with a high-rise building, causing the damage to the ecosystem, the damage to the energy demand, the water demand. All these can be controlled if we have a new typology of development. Traditionally in Kerala, we had single-story or two-story houses, two-story buildings, which is scattered all over the land. Now, that typology also meant that you could freely invade paddy fields, you could freely invade riverbeds and so on. Now, that mindset needs to be contained into a new housing policy, which will look at new kind of typologies of building, which are socially driven, not simply by bringing people together to live next to each other, but organizing the people in such a way through a participative process to create an integrated living in an integrated landscape. The two cannot be seen separately. You cannot think of an integrated landscape in which you don't have an integrated community. You need both these things to happen simultaneously. So there is need for revisiting the kind of development we have had, the methodologies that we use for redevelopment. There's a need to revisit the typology of living that we have had, the single story, I own my own flat kind of attitude towards more clustered kind of development, and an approach to landscape that is integrated with living. An approach to, when I say landscape, it's I say it in a generic term. I'm not talking in terms of a designed landscape, landscaped environment. I'm talking about an environment in which there's an integration between the land, the vegetation, and the people. So it's only from a rethinking from that kind of a mindset can we move forward. Otherwise, in the next flood, we'll have exactly the same thing repeating. Thousands of people losing their homes, losing their property, losing their response. And again, once a big scurry to save them from the disaster, pump in money to redevelop everything. This is a cycle that's going to repeat. Because all said and done, even in the universe, we don't exist alone. We live in a universe where there are already planetary changes taking place. There are climatic changes taking place. There is sea level rising. There are changes in rain patterns. There are changes in movement of currents of air. There is all kinds of things happening in the universe and in the world. And within that perspective, if you think that we can have an isolated solution for Kerala, we are being foolish about it. We need to look at the larger perspective of climate change and look at localized policies which address the issues fundamentally. This means opening up a new discourse between people and the government and the people who are going to give the money to grow this new development. So that's the type of mindset shift that we need to look at if we want to be in a better position in future development.
Are we able to influence the government to mitigate these issues that are being discussed? Mr. Krishnamachari, what do you feel about it? As a panel, we are an eminent panel. do we have some kind of a forum by which we are able to influence government policy making to help the state of Kerala? Mr. Krishnamachari, if you can unmute yourself. Thank you.
Yeah, it's an important question. Who makes the policy? Makers, who are the people? Unfortunately, in general public, when we look at it, the people are not at all aware about the laws and rules of the land. They inhabit, wherever they inhabit. Even I'm not really aware of many. I'm ignorant about the laws of the land too. There are. It is important to people like of course there are we have Mr. K.T. Ravindran is also. I was studying one of his projects, a master plan he created for Kochi and Mattancheri area. It's an incredible study, 86 or something he had created. So I think it is important that to make people aware from the ground level to the policy makers, from the government to the ground level. There should be a kind of awareness campaign or awareness kind of things needs to be made. The land belongs to whom, the plants belongs to whom, the rain waters and the salt water, all these kind of sky belongs to whom. These kind of things needs to be largely discussed to the public. I think public needs to be incorporated when we have a discussions of policy making. I know some of my friends are also saying sometimes they have no idea about when they are building their houses very close to the river, or what are the kind of rules. Even the panchayat president or panchayat people to the minister of the same divisions may not be really aware of what are the policies and what are the kind of laws are behind each sector, each places. So the locations being studied or whatever. I think it is important to make awareness about the laws and rules to the people, especially to the common man, and looking at that, making them aware. Then from there we can educate them in some ways that where they should be building, what kind of building can be done. So I think it is important to have people like Shankar sir and Mr. K.T. Ravindran, who are all really experienced in this field. The master plan making about the country or the state or a local area is also important, I think.
Mr. Rao, how do we influence this? How do we influence so that we mitigate disaster, mitigate what Kerala faces as we go along?
I've been listening to Shankar, KT and Bose, and here I absolutely fully agree with KT to a very great extent. But I would like to say that to some extent I would accept densification and mid-rises, say up to 10 to 12 story buildings, especially if they are helpful in reducing automobiles. Like if we are able to have densified settlements which have, which are interconnected with walkable transit, and have you have such kind of densified settlements only in transit, like a transit oriented development you have in near railway stations, near bus stations, near bus stops, near metro stations. All these places within a walking distance of that, you allow a certain degree of high rises, so that you have some people are very much hell-bent on having so-called urban life, and such people, and there is a fascination for such kind of urban life. Let them have that, and let that kind of an urban settlement also coexist. And there is a lot of skill that is already there in our engineering faculty, in our builders, and all to build a certain degree of high rises, that cement and steel and such consumptions are reduced, and perhaps we may have to come up with things like CLT wood, which is a probable material for the future for limited number of urban settlements, but predominantly people will stay in low-rise settlements and look after land. And such a kind of a thinking, if that kind of a mix of densified settlements together with people looking after land, if that kind of a mixed policy thinking is kind of propagated among our leaders, and if they come to accept that, which is definitely is a possibility, so that all segments of the population is taken care of. You have the business people, you have the builders, you have the investors, they are also taken care of, and you have people who are in the rural areas who look after the land, and then we also bring awareness that this urban sprawl is a virus, and that is going to kill us, and that is going to kill our environment, and that is going to destroy our whole environment, and that is going to be a big waste. And if that kind of a waste, if that awareness is created among our leaders and our general population, then such a kind of a mixed settlement pattern is not too difficult. That awareness level, right now in Kerala, the atmosphere is fairly clear, fairly very much there. People are wanting new ideas, and there is a need to have a balance, taking all segments of people together. That balance, if we are able to strike that balance correctly, and if we are able to articulate a new architecture which balances out the aspirations of all segments of the population, and also absorbs the kind of the population who is going to come migrating from the Gulf and such places, who are kind of used to having certain so-called urban life. All these balance is something that definitely is possible, and if that balance is articulated in the form of built imagery, then we may be able to get across with the right kind of land use, with the right kind of digital land use plan that our electronic systems have made it possible now. Such a balance is definitely possible with proper decentralization. That is, if each district, each local body is able to make their own master plans, and if they are able to say these areas can be kind of densified with walkable densification is possible, then the rest of the areas are freed up for all kinds of preservation of environment and agriculture and such kind of things. Then that balance is definitely possible, and that is something that we can definitely bring awareness and change the mindset of the people, is what I believe. Yes, Shankar, you were saying something?
You have to unmute, Shankar.
Yeah. Am I audible now?
Yes, absolutely.
A very quick rejoinder to what Jaigopal was dwelling on. Kerala has a mission called Life Mission, which talks about wiping out the houselessness from the state. And they start with very funny ideas. Let me tell you, they called it motivation towers. They called it inspiration towers. They were talking about 14 to 15-story, multi-story buildings for the poor people. The revenue authorities in the state always give dilapidated land But nobody wants to degraded land for these poor people. And they were actually, the sites that were selected were all these degraded land, which were flood prone. So when you look at the structure of these buildings, we had to spend a lot of money on the piles, underneath piles and things like that. Finally, you know, the government insisted on prefab structures, the government insisted on multi-story buildings. We said the people of Kerala will reject it, especially the poor people of Kerala will reject anything that goes beyond, you know, 3-4 stories because of certain reasons, you know. They will put lifts, which will never work. Lift is a very sensitive material, which will never work. They will compromise on the fire safety regulations. We want to put the fire safety and look at the structural government. What was happening is that, you know, normally the government is giving 4 to 4.5 lakhs as a subsistent kind of a subsidy for the poor people to build houses. But when we are working out the per you know, square foot, it was going much below 2,500 rupees, you know, because the structure itself was costing so much of money. And we were actually creating islands of, you know, we were breaking the basic equation of equality. On one side, for poor people who have land, we are giving 4.5 lakhs. The other side, can we promote these kind of housing, which will cost 15 lakhs to 16 lakhs per a small, you know, unit of 450, 500 square feet, 2 small bedrooms and the rest of it. The people rejected it outright. When the government came to know about the estimates, then they also started backing out. Good news for me. Good news for people like me, because we are always opposing these kind of vertical development. We want, I mean, I've been working Dharavi, you know. We are now putting up huge multi-story apartments. I mean, they have new systems, you know, of watering the land for, you know, commercial gains. But in Dharavi, when I looked at it as an urban planner, as a planner, we found out that with low-rise, you know, high-density kind of solution that KT had been proposing, we are still able to meet the targets. And still, Western Kochi, I've been there several times looking at the most dense, you know, I think is one of the most dense locations in the whole country. 15,000 people living in 1 square kilometer is unimaginable. 15,000 people living in 1 square kilometer. I mean, I think we have to look at new solutions, new paradigms, new challenges. Land is going to be a big challenge there. That's it. Yeah.
We have a lot of questions, though I wanted to ask a little more, discuss a little more on tall structures vis-a-vis maybe 10-story or 12-story, as Mr. Rao had suggested. But I think, I don't know whether we have time, but that is something that we can discuss, because some of the earlier panels have been advocating very tall structures and dense and less use land, leave a lot more land free and open. But maybe that can be discussed at another time. We have some questions from the audience. Nila, do you want to ask some questions? Do you want to come into the room and ask?
Hi, this question was to Mr. KT, and he's been my professor also, and I have a huge respect for the way the things he has taught us over in the School of Planning and Architecture. And subsequently, I have gone to the other side, as they call it. So my question would be that what would be the current model since the time we studied 30 years ago to what the densities or the demand for urban population is today? What, Mr. KT, would be your model for a medium density or a high density developments in the city? Or would you recommend saying that should we increase the density in the current cities and not encroach upon the fields? Or would you suggest that we do spread further and create low density spaces?
Well, may I answer?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. I would like to suggest that as much as we talk about walkable cities, we need to talk about walk-up buildings. That is, we are able to move people at the horizontal plane as well as on the vertical plane without using mechanical means. That's when you move towards energy security. So that's point number one. So the very idea, whether it's 12 stories or 100 stories, the building's height, the difference is just that you consume a little more steel to make the building more ductile and so on. But apart from that, as repercussions in terms of society and on land, there is hardly any difference. very often people mistake that high density means high rise. This is not correct at all. This is because people think in terms of built spaces and number of people, and they don't think about land requirement and number of people. The higher you go, the more people you have to accommodate, you can accommodate in the buildings, the larger amount of land that you require to leave as open spaces and movement and landscaped areas and so on, which will actually balance out if you're looking at a healthy living. So it's not true that you can build high-rise and use less land. That's false. That is a wrong belief, which is there, very popular among many of the politicians across the country. I must say that Kerala perhaps has exceptions, because Kerala government, apart from having the splendid performance that it has been putting forward in the recent times, is one of the most open governments, and they have a very, very well enlightened bureaucracy who's actually driving the change in Kerala. So if any state can understand or move towards this kind of new concepts, this is not new concept, it's an old concept, but one keeps articulating it again and again because of the fundamental values it carries. You go to Paris, if you go to Paris, you will see that the whole city is as urban as it can get. It's been the seat of, like many cultures for so many years. Hundreds of years, it's led from the front, the areas of culture, art, music, everything. And if you look at that city is largely ground plus 4 or maximum ground plus 5. It is a walkable city. It has no multi-story building. It has just one multi-story building, which has come up in one place like a sore thumb. And one of the architects told me the only good thing about that tall building is that when you are in it, you can see the whole city, but you can't see the ugliness of that very building. That is the level in which Parisians are aware about the ills of going high. It's a wonderful city. It's as urban, as dense as any other city that you can find. You don't have to go tall to be able to build with high density. High density is a matter of calculation of number of people to land, not the built up space to number of people. This is an illusion which the politicians have, because most of their decisions are driven by people whose vested interest it is to maximize the profit from every parcel of land. That's not how you look at a healthy, balanced, properly articulated built environment. You look at it from terms of people and land, not building and people.
We have another question from Mr. Mujib Ahmad. Is it time for Kerala to move out of its obsession to build individual houses in the orchard, instead move to clusters which are more efficient, especially when the centralized waste management is almost non-existent? If yes, how do we incentivize this model?
I think this is eminently possible in Kerala, because people who go out of Kerala, there are like 4 million Keralites who live outside Kerala. They go and live in Dubai and places where there's hardly any buildable land or green or anything, and they live in multi-story buildings. They live in kind of dense kind of conditions. They come to Delhi. They live in kind of areas which are reasonably dense and very often in multi-story buildings. They're used to living in all kinds of conditions. They're not the people who are still longing for that building in the garden kind of typology. But those who want to do so should also be given the opportunity to do so. I am not against the beauty of the building in the garden typology. That's a very lovely typology where it allows for breeze flows. Your eyes are always cool with green foliage and so on. So it's a wonderful typology. But it's very much possible when you look at the reason for the last floods, it's very much possible to actually agglomerate people and social amenities into dense ground plus 3 or ground plus 4 structures. It's very much possible, and it's all a matter of good design. Whether you create, like Bombay low housing type of nightmares, where you have very narrow pathways where 50% of the people are down with TB, you can think of that kind of horrors, or you can also think of areas where you have low rise but high density living, with proper social and other amenities. It is very much possible to balance the environment even in a low-rise, high-density form.
Somebody else like to answer this, or should we take the next question? Mr. Rao, would you like to answer that as well?
Yeah, I'd like to completely agree with Katie, except for the number of floors that that I may allow. If he is agreeable for 3, 4, or 5 floors, I would say we can go up to 9, 10. Primarily because the same structure, you need concrete frames to go 4 or 5 floors. You need similar foundations. You need a lift. You need all such kind of things to from 3 or 4 or 5 floors. Now our regulations require that all floors has to be accessible for disabled friendly people. So you need that many number of lifts also. So you allow up to, and then we can, if we are allowing for a few more floors, and if we are totally cutting off automobile as much as possible, and I feel automobile, according to me, is the biggest culprit in our social fabric. So if we are able to keep away automobiles, and if we are able to have mass transit systems like even highways and coastal highways and hill highways and all, something that I'm extremely worried about. Instead, if you need people to reach rural areas, and you should have only railways, and then you have kind of densified settlements around railway stations. Like that, you should reduce roads and automobile dependence. And if in that process, if we want to increase a few number of floors for, say, up to 7, 8, 9, up to 10 is okay as far as I am concerned. But the urban sprawl and automobile dependence is something, and is something that we have to get a grip on, to try to eliminate as much as possible. And for that, to give some compromise, I'm okay to give a few more floors, is my small argument. And densified settlements is definitely possible, walkable, and if we are bringing walkability, then with mass transit systems, you don't need cars. You can live without cars, and such a kind of this thing is possible, and that will free up a lot of rural land, and we can say that such kind of densified settlements are possible only around mass transit areas. And then the rest of the areas, you have only ground plus 1 buildings where local materials are made use of, and only local materials should be made use of, and an architecture which is more eco-friendly, and communities and all should come up. So such kind of thing is possible when you arrest urban sprawl. Only then the rural areas get released, is my point. So the rest of the things I fully agree with Katie, absolutely. It's only the number of floors.
Next question, Anika.
The second part of the question was, how can we incentivize this? So he's just asked that again, that we didn't get an answer to how to incentivize it.
Can I say that?
Please, go ahead.
I have fairly worked out a number of models. I have tried to circulate that around with a number of people also, where a certain degree of densification and allowing high rises to the tune of some 10 to 12 floors will bring in a certain densification will bring in a value, and that can kind of offset the environmental cost that is involved in. involved in the settlements around, the kind of the roads that is needed, the water supply that is needed, the electricity that is needed, the street lights, the women-friendly street lights that is needed, because you have to have all the places safe. All these are possible if you allow small pockets to be developed, and you can get the local bodies in turn to demand the builders to give all these facilities for the people around it. A kind of a trade-off is definitely possible if our local bodies are assertive enough, if our local bodies have that kind of, that is where our 73 and 74th Amendment becomes important. Our local bodies become really assertive, and we have excellent people. We have a number of retired people who definitely are still active as far as their brains are concerned. All these people can definitely take up responsibility of our towns and the cities, and they can bring control to the local bodies, and they can lead the local bodies and bring the business lobby in control. You are afraid, the present, my mindset is that we are afraid that the builders will run away with a lot of profits. So that is something that a strong rural, strong local body should be able to control these builders and get the builders to, to give in return, demand a lot of things from the builders in return, so that they take care of the roads around a certain built environment. They take care of the drainage. They take care of the solid waste management around. They take care of the liquid waste management around. These kind of trade-offs is something that definitely possible if we are able to have a very strong local body which gives a certain concession to the builders but demands certain other things from builders. And we can also get these local bodies to demand that the builders take care of the natural environment around the mangroves, the mangrove ecosystems. All these has to be protected. That kind of a development is definitely possible with a very strong local body dictating terms. And right now we are afraid that local bodies will not be able to dictate, and the builders will be able to run away taking advantage. And that is something that we have to definitely address.
Thank you. I'll move on to the next.
May I just add a point? Yeah. I think one of the best way to incentivize such cluster form of development is actually to cluster the social amenities that go with housing. We stop thinking about housing as individual housing units or households, individual household units, but we think about them as a group of people who require a certain level of quality of life, which is given by the social amenities that you provide and the spatial planning that you do around it. So that means you bring in a bit of nature and you bring in a concentration of social amenities into a location. You'll automatically find people moving towards that area, especially because if things like schools and community centers and health centers are provided for, you will find that people are attracted to move towards those areas. So, which are very much within the hands of the government to make these provisions. So it's a question of not looking at how people are scattered, but looking at how people can be brought together, how you can get them to converge around the amenities that you provide. So social amenities actually provide the clue to getting people to move. That's an incentive for them to move into those areas.
Thank you. We're moving on to the next question. We have a question from Mr. Narayanan Krishna Kumar. I've always felt that rapid urbanization is making all the modern cities look a bit like New York, Shanghai, London, Berlin, and so on. the likes of which Indian cities like Delhi, Mumbai, Bangalore, and Hyderabad are soon merging into, left with only a small part where the so-called old town city that shows traditional architecture which becomes revenue generating monuments. As architects and urbanists, how do we bring back that sense of Indianness at an urban level instead of cloning the West, not compromising or slowing down development?
Who will take that? Mr. Shankar, you will take that? If you can unmute.
Yeah, I mean, that's a very meaningful and relevant question. I'm really impressed by the tone of that question, because there is a young person who is extolling the virtues of the mining, to that scale is really surprising and pleasant to me. But having said that, the basic challenge that we are facing in India, for that instance, the third world countries, is one. There's a brown agenda before us. We're talking about poverty on one side, we are talking about environment on the second side, and we are talking about development on the third side. The whole question before us, citizens of the third world, is to have actually connect these seemingly diverse phenomena, poverty on one side, development on the other side, and environment on the third side. It is this connectivity and it is a synergy which is probably going to take the world forward. We are talking about smart cities vision now. When we are talking about smart cities vision, it's not about connectivity. Let me tell you that people are having a wrong notion that it's all about IT connectivity. Yes, IT tools are being probably used to elevate, enhance probably some of the conveniences. But at the base level, we are looking at poor people's housing settlements, a very critical element of this smart mission. Giving amenities to them, taking social amenities to them, looking at new ways of waste management, looking at very friendly types of constructions. That's very interesting, because poverty alleviation has to be a part of the urban planning, especially in India. Poverty alleviation, how do you link these programs to vocational training? How do you link these housing schemes to livelihood? It's a very critical issue that, in fact, Kerala is beginning to dwell on. The whole life mission which Kerala government is talking about, actually, one of the unique features of this particular project is linking livelihood to the living quarters, which is very, very strange and which is very unique. That way, we are actually taking the urbanization process in a very positive way, looking at sustainable ways of waste management, sustainable ways of water management, sustainable ways of soil management, sustainable ways of habitat management. And that's the way. The scale, for a city, the scale is very important. That is why we still talk about Delhi, look at Delhi as an example, because scales are still very friendly. There's only one part of Delhi which is highly densified, like Kasturba Gandhi Marg or the place near. All the other places still the protocols remain, and still the skyline looks very friendly. That is probably the model. But unfortunately, we are talking about land issues now, land becoming very scarce. I actually want to dwell a little bit on that, because land issue is basically a political issue. And I don't want to dwell on that, because it's a political issue where 80% of the land being owned by 20% and 20% of the population fighting for 80% of the land rights is a political issue that needs to be solved. So that way, probably we'll talk about urban, having high density development and things like that. But you have to keep the spirit of the town very vibrant, and that's the way out for people like us, people from third world.
Okay, last couple of questions. I saw Vivek Gupta there. Vivek, would you like to come into the room? Yes, great.
My question is, hi, my question is to Jay and Katie. Basically, your advocacy about densification around the circulation arteries. The thing is that we know the densification will lead to organic development, because as Katie also said that it will lead to holistic environment where it's not just the housing, then there would be clubs, there would be shopping, there would be slums. And so the whole gamut will again start. And that will also, even in urban areas, affect the lay of the land, leading to ecological cascading effect. So where do you contain an urban area? And the circulation artery will then thereby lead to automobiles, will lead to further urbanization. The attraction of being around a convenient mode of transport, all right. But besides that, the ills of any urbanization leading to slums and all that, what is your take on that? And second part of that, what you spoke earlier is about architects being responsible for the mess that is there in Kerala. I think it's we architects are only designing in the parcels of land that they are given. It's an example is Leh. What happened there is when you start building clusters with boundaries, that is where the lay of the land changes. If you keep building without boundaries, the lay of the land does not change. You know, so the water will continue to flow the way it was flowing earlier. It's when you start segmenting an entire city, an entire settlement, that is when this problem comes. Any take on that? Thank you.
May I answer that question? Or Jaigopal, would you like to speak?
No, KT, you can start off and I'll say whatever I feel if I feel anything further.
Yeah. First of all, I think when we are saying that every city is beginning to look like each other, it's the skyline of every city which is beginning to look like each other. The floor of the city essentially remains different. Whether you go to New York, you go to Shanghai, you go to Berlin, you go to London, or you go to Hyderabad or Bombay or anywhere else, you will find that the texture of life on the street is very different from each other. Unfortunately, we are enamored by the spectacle of the glass high-rise buildings, and we think that they all look alike. And as long as you can emulate that, we are okay. We have become a modern city. But you look at New York, the pedestrian pathways in New York are at least 6 meters wide in most places, minimum. You can walk everywhere. It's so well lit, it's so well contained in terms of the floor of the city. It's so well managed in the floor of the city that it is a completely pedestrian friendly city. Thousands of people walk to work and back in New York. Even the man who is number 2 in the UN doesn't have his own car because it's not possible to own a car there. There's no place for parking. There are a few cars which you can see which are parked on the 60th floor and 70th floor on the terrace by mechanical means, but that's far too expensive for anyone to maintain. So the issue and problem of car is not related only to the size and density of the city. The problem of the automobile is something far more complex. It's a problem of how easy financing an automobile has become. How much automobile production has been encouraged as an engine for growth in our economy. There are many different dimensions to the growth of the automobile, and it's not just concentration of people which is calling for more concentration of automobiles. This is one point I wanted to make clear. Second thing is that actually, the question that the last person asked was so complex. It had so many questions within them that I'm kind of losing track on what all issues that he had raised. He had raised so many different issues. So it is inevitable that we move towards a mass transport system, and we look at the possibility of making more and more walkable cities. There is no other solution. The higher the consumption of resources by the cities, right now as it stands, about 40% of all resources used in the world are used for the construction industry. 40%, it's a huge amount of consumption. And we are largely responsible for the carbon emission, the heightened carbon emission in the world. We are highly responsible as people in the built industry. But I would at the same time like to argue that architects are not responsible for this solely. Architects don't exist as islands. Architects are also part of a larger system of development and just one cog in the wheel. Perhaps they play a decisive role in terms of the quality of life that can be generated. For instance, if you do a bad piece of design, people have to live with it all their lives. That's a horribly consequential thing. At the same time, if you're able to do something that's beautiful and that's able to transform people's lives, that also stays with them. So it is a consequential profession. But to assume that we are responsible or capable or are in charge of running the quality of life of this whole world is completely not, I don't agree with that at all. I feel we are just part of a larger system and we have to function within that system. But the problem is that the manner in which we function can be either a good way, that is often developing a critical thinking about where we live in and what are the systems we live with, or being completely compliant, looking at more and more profitability. So the problem is not with the profession of the architect. The problem is the manner in which some architects pursue their profession. So it's in the process, not in the principle. The problem is. So this is one more point which I wanted to make. Next point is that fundamentally something which I also did not touch upon earlier, but as an urban designer, I am very aware of this. Every individual act of design is actually contributing to the quality of life in a city. We are brick by brick building up the cities. If a city is a mess, we are as much responsible in the areas in which we are contributing as anyone else. But we always exist within a larger political and financial system. Nowadays, we know that the financial system runs the politics and they are more or less one and the same. And if we are able to take a critical overview of that system, then I think we can position ourselves practically in terms of our own profession within that milieu. But there can't be just one model or method that fits all. It has to be individually negotiated in the context of one's own profession.
Okay, now a last question. Anika, what question is there?
So this is kind of directed at Mr. Bose Krishnamachari. Isn't it high time we start looking at alternative materials more seriously when it comes to application as opposed to just developing it theoretically? Do we have the space and time to continue relying on legacy and traditional materials and methods which don't necessarily meet our current requirements? And how can the Kochi Biennale help to promote the use of using more sustainable and eco-friendly materials in our daily lives?
It's a wonderful question, and also means like I believe that it is important to look at new materiality and sciences. You know, we have to. I was thinking about it is important to make maybe in our state and country there we should have some material museums, and also we should have universities, arts, architecture, and sciences. And it should come together. We should have that kind of creative spaces to be created for future generation of architects. We have more than, in Kerala itself, I think we have more than 37 architecture colleges. You know, and I would say that, you know, architects are in some ways are responsible for making visually historically important. At the same time, it is also, we could see terrible you know, architecture created in cities. So I think, you know, we have to rethink about how we can art and architecture, design, all these fields and sciences and technology should come together. I'm not really talking about the liberal ways of practicing, but I think, you know, daily practices of materiality, materials, like, you know, for example, you know, Wang Shu's, this architect, every day he practices his calligraphy. You know, that calligraphy making itself taken him into a kind of incredible way of making architecture. So knowing about themselves, knowing about the location, knowing about earth and sky, it's all important when you build new architecture. Of course, we as Kochi Biennial Foundation, we really think about, most important issue now we face is about ecological issues, the climate change. We all think like, all around the world, people are thinking about how we can overcome, how we can face such disasters. Actually, when we look at even Kochi sea face, the water rising, you can feel it every other year when we look at that space. Every day, maybe you can look at that space. So I think we have to be more responsible. Of course, the Biennial Foundation seriously looking into it, and according to that, we work with the people. I think it is important that everybody's part of it. Thinkers and all creative practitioners should be part of it, and we accept all kinds of ideas and thinking. Thank you.
Give me some 2 minutes of time on materiality. Can I?
Yes, please, absolutely, go ahead, Mr. Ram.
Here, I would definitely like to add a few points. Kerala is running out of clay, Kerala is running out of sand, Kerala is running out of, we don't have cement in our, it's all has to come from North India. The steel has to come from North India. What is definitely what can grow in Kerala is bamboo and timber. So timber architecture has always been there in Kerala, but we have now the possibility that bamboo and wood can be cross-laminated. We can come up with the possibility of CLT wood, which has got high density, high strength, which can go large spans, which can go multi-storied, but all comes from from plantation, from so you can grow. You can actually regenerate your building material. You can grow building material, and regenerating. We always had bamboo forests which we cut for tea and coffee and rubber and such kind of things. So now these plantations no longer are relevant. Actually, we can actually have our bamboo forest can grow back, our timber forest can grow back, and then we can have a construction subsector which makes use of timber, and with improved quality of stuff, timber like CLT wood, we can have a totally new construction subsector. So definitely this is a move. If we are able to move towards that now, maybe some 10 years to 15 years later, we'll be having enough timber to take care of all our constructions and our raw material need, even for our industries. And without, you can actually contribute, which can sequester carbon dioxide, all such benefits, and it can improve the soil. All these benefits is possible if we are able to bring such kind of a change in materiality, and we are planning for that. And it's a definite direction that probably can give the government, and try to bring in this idea of bamboo plantation timber, reconstituted and cross-laminated timber. Thank you.
Can I add a point? Can I just add a point to this?
Yes, sir.
It's not just about the materiality of each individual materials that go into the construction of the building. It's also about the reuse of existing spaces. I think I'd like to congratulate Bose on this account, both Mr. Bose, Krishnamachari, Riaz, and others who actually initiated the whole Cochin Biennale movement. Is one of the finest example of reuse of existing fabric. Without investing much money into it, it's a specific artwork which actually is retractable from it, and it doesn't transform the original form, and it continues to be recycled into a contemporary use. This is a fabulous example of how an existing fabric can be reused without destroying them. One of the fundamental problems of modern movement is that the entire theory that unless you destroy what is existing, you cannot make something new is a predatory relationship with what is existing. This is what destroys history. This is what is unsustainable, because we need to consume more and more materials. If you look at the footprint, the ecological footprint of the materials that we consume, you take aluminum, you take glass, you take any of the harder material that goes into building, its footprint is enormous. Starting from deforestation, dislocation of tribal people, to the problems of mining, the amount of energy, it's unthinkably humongous, the cost that goes into the background of the production of these materials. Whereas if we are able to look at the existing cities, existing materials, recycling, reuse of these existing places and materials, we'll have a more sustainable approach. That's a fundamental mind shift that we need to make.
Yes, Mr. Shankar, you'll have to unmute yourself.
Yeah, one sentence. You know, with such pride, let me tell you that Kerala is a depository. Where else in the world can you find such a depository of wonderful, wonderful, natural and sustainable building materials? I'm from that state. Everything in Kerala can be used. The earth, Mother Earth, the lime deposit, the richest lime deposit that we have in the world, the richest lime deposit that we have in the world. We have so many wonderful materials like laterite, with which I hope the new generations of architects will create meaningful, sustainable expressions in architecture. Thank you.
I think we'll have to, I think we've exceeded our time a lot, and it's been a really interesting discussion. We've all enjoyed it. The participants have enjoyed it. It's on our Facebook page, and thousands of people have watched it, and thousands of people continue to see the recording. And thank you all very, very much for this very interesting and exciting discussion. Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you for inviting me. Thank you all.
Thank you, Mr. Talwar and Nitco, for organizing this. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It was a pleasure. Indeed.